Yeah, but we can talk about market share in a different way.
We can definitely talk about market share in a different way, in a much more positive way. So, AMD has had record market share. Not that the record market share was unexpected, because they've had record market share every quarter for quite some time now. But this is their highest market share in x86 processor market since 2013, which is a pretty big deal in and of itself. So they are sitting right now at 18.3% out of all x86 market share, and this was done by Mercury Research. They're a pretty reliable research company. And 18.3%, that includes servers, mobile, and desktop. So it's the whole x86 market as a whole, which is different than what AMD necessarily pulls from. So don't expect these numbers to exactly match up with like what AMD is pulling, because they have certain qualifications of what devices count and stuff as market share. Whereas this is just CPUs, like flat out. Now to go through some of the fun numbers here. So their market share is 19.2% in the desktop, so a little higher. 19.9% in the mobile market, which is higher than I think we expected it to be at this point in time.
Yeah, I expected mobile to be lower than desktop.
Yeah, same. So it was pretty crazy to see that we're getting more mobile market share. But it's just because we're starting to see some OEMs finally implement AMD's products, which is just fantastic. Because they're honestly, like, every review of mobile AMD chips right now has been like, oh yeah, they're winning, which is about what we would have expected based on, the desktop parts. And then their server market share is 5.8%, which is not very huge. But what's important to keep in mind about that is that they were back at effectively 0% only like 4 years ago. Like, so you go back to Q2 2018, their server market share was 1.4%. And so before that, before Zen was around, before Epic, it was even lower. So this is actually a huge clawback from AMD. And obviously we'd like to see that closer to, the 40 to 50% range, for good competition, because we only have two people there, or two companies there right now. But it's still awesome to see them making that kind of a pull there. And so just to go over a couple of the prior quarters. So Q4 2019, desktop was 18.3%. And mobile was 16.2, and server was 4.5. And then you go to Q1 of 2020, desktop's 18.6%, 17.1% for mobile, and 4.5% for server. So you can see this pretty consistent growth, and mobile's the one that actually blew up between Q1 and Q2 this year. Pretty crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder how this conversation is going to change as ARM grows, because like
Yeah.
ARM is already being implemented in server.
Right.
And we've seen more and more of that. I think AWS is implementing some new ARM servers and stuff.
Most server platforms are, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like that's going to change the discussion. And then Apple Silicon is obviously going to have some impact. Apple's not huge market share wise on desktop and laptop,
Yeah.
but it will have some swing on that. And then it will no doubt influence Windows, especially if Apple does come in and cut pricing with
Yes.
Apple Silicon within a couple of years. It will no doubt change ARM
Or
for
even this year.
Windows. I'd be surprised if year one they did a price cut. They
Yeah.
might do it. They might do it on one product just to be like, see how much better this is. Like everyone should use Apple Silicon.
Yeah.
Like release the 799 base MacBook.
Right.
And everything else in the lineup stay the same. But I'm talking like a couple of years from now when they could theoretically shift the whole product stack down $100 or $200, because
Yeah, that's true.
the fact of the matter is that the most expensive Apple chip that we know of is the A13 at $64, which is much cheaper than Apple pays for anything from Intel,
Oh yeah, or
including
pretty
their
much
shittiest
anybody pays
processor.
for
Yeah.
anything. Yeah. So it'll. I guess we'll have to start factoring in, ARM architecture into some of these judgments, right now, because this is obviously based x86 specific. But x86 even currently still covers basically all compute that's not hypermobile like phones and tablets. But
Yeah.
that is
But
definitely changing.
also, when do we start counting tablets, for example,
Hmm.
in the laptop-esque space?
Well, right. Yeah.
Obviously, they're
Yeah.
not a laptop, so you don't count them as a laptop. But when they're hitting that type of productivity feature with iPad OS, as that continually improves
Right.
and is better at multitasking, and let's be real, for most normal laptop users, they would be just fine with a Chromebook or an iPad. And so it's like, when do you start counting iPad against that market share?
Yeah, yeah, and same with servers using ARM chips. When do you start counting that as well? So
Yeah.
at some point we need to see, we need to see server and mobile and desktop segments, including things like ARM instead of just x86. But I
I
think
think
that'll probably start to change
funny,
next year.
yeah, I think the funniest one will be desktop because like there is already ARM laptop. Oh, I mean there is ARM laptops, but
Yeah,
I'm counting iPad in that because iPad makes up more of a market share than any of the actual ARM laptops.
the ARM laptops
And
right
then
now
there is
stuck.
ARM
Yeah,
servers, but like there's not really ARM desktops. I mean there's
no.
like Raspberry Pi, but like we're not. I'm talking like actual like relatively like performant desktops.
Like
There's
a desktop
not.
you can do work on. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Whereas, once we get the ARM iMac, there will be. Once we get
yeah.
the ARM uh, Mac Mini, there will be.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that'll be the interesting one, I think.
There will be some teething issues, of course, but
Hmm.
I mean, I fully expect things like OBS to not support ARM right away, but it'll be interesting to see when things
I
move in that
wonder
direction.
how well Rosetta will work for that because what we're seeing, like
Yeah.
there was a tweet from someone who works at Disney as a software engineer on some of their video software,
Hmm.
and they were talking about how Rosetta is way better than they expected it to be
Huh.
at like complicated stuff because it works at install time.
It'll be interesting
Um,
to see how well it works because, like, obviously we have Qualcomm and Microsoft working together for their x86 emulation on ARM, but of course it's live emulation, not at install time. But it's interesting to see how bad that's been, and that's by the people that specialize in ARM.
well, I mean, Apple specializes in ARM
Oh
as
no, I know, but I mean
well,
like people like the people that specialize in ARM that are actually selling products to people other than just making them
but
for themselves.
Apple's worked on ARM chips more significantly than Qualcomm has for a longer period of time because
Yeah,
Qualcomm didn't have the architectural license. Qualcomm
right,
essentially
right.
just repackaged chips for a while.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Um, and then also because Apple is in software development, whereas Qualcomm is not, they have more experience on that front.
Right.
Whereas you have Apple and Microsoft, or you have Qualcomm and Microsoft working together to achieve something that Apple is doing in house completely.
Yeah, that's a
And
good point.
then Apple also has experience with architectural changes, whereas Windows hasn't had a significant change in a very, very long like what was
Ever?
the last
I
yeah, what
mean,
was the last
basically
non
back.
x86 thing they were on?
Yeah, I mean it was back when obviously when we had 32-bit instead, but like that was not really.
Yeah,
That's still x86 instruction set. That was the
yeah,
big architectural change back in Windows 7 when we saw 64-bit become more popular, and I guess even back in like Vista. But
yeah.
yeah,
So like that's where I think like Apple just has the advantage. And then also the other thing is that because Apple runs successful app stores and Windows does not.
yeah, this is true. The Windows App Store doesn't make any sense. Remember when I was trying to get the like Windows version of Minecraft installed instead of using Java
Yeah.
and searching, or no, it was when I was trying to get Minecraft Dungeons as well. It
Mhm.
was both situations, and searching for Minecraft came up with neither one in the Windows Store. But if I clicked it from the website that takes me to the Windows Store, it would take me to that place.
Yeah.
It's terrible. So
So
that's a good point. That's a very good point.
yeah, and I wonder like just it's going to be so fascinating to see what someone like AMD does to compete with the power advantages that we believe ARM has. And I'm saying we believe because like
We
we
haven't seen
haven't really
ARM like.
seen yeah, we haven't seen ARM for laptop, like for like a MacBook
Mhm.
Pro-esque laptop.
Though we
And
have seen
so
high clocked ARM for servers, and that has been proven more efficient. So, high
yes, but
clock rates
that's
and stuff. That
but
says
in that
something.
case though with servers, you're getting much more focus built applications. And
Yeah.
so having applications designed specifically for that architecture is a little bit different. Obviously, eventually, Apple's stuff will be designed better for ARM.
Yeah, though even in that direction though, the power usage obviously in part is tied to the instructions specifically being used, just like we know like AVX 512 on Intel stuff right now like produces way more heat than some of the
Mhm.
other instructions, but these servers are under really, really, really high load consistently at high clock speeds, and that can give us a decent idea of what the heat output and power usage is going to be, because
Yeah.
it's not like we're going to see like that many different instructions on desktop or laptop.
The other thing, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know as much about the server side of ARM.
Yeah.
The thing that Apple does differently, even than Qualcomm, for example, and part of why they have such an advantage, is that Apple segments out a lot of their hardware. It's not just like this ARM chip does everything. It's here's the ARM chip for general compute, but then we have this and this and this and this different separate microprocessor for all these different things.
Yeah.
And I don't think that ARM for server does that. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that translates. If, obviously Apple's been making a big push for machine learning, for example. Well, what is their machine learning chip in Mac going to look like, and what applications will that bring, and how will that affect power?
Yeah, that's true, because they are going to be doing it differently than the way Qualcomm would do it. That is a good point. Yeah.
It's a very unique situation where Apple is like essentially building like application-specific compute devices into their chip at a whole bunch of them, and then having the general compute ARM chip separate for the last thing it's needed. Because like even now on the Intel Macs, the T2 chip does H.264 encoding.
That's a good point. That's actually a really good point. And H.264 and H.265 on like iPad and stuff are insane. So it'll be interesting to see that. In fact, it'll be interesting to see what a big interest of mine is going to be able to see like what things like Final Cut and stuff can do on ARM-based Macs. Like, what are they going to focus on? What are they going to specialize on that's going to make them good or bad? Because like right now, like even using GPU acceleration in DaVinci Resolve, editing X264 and H265 is like way worse of experience than using my Threadripper 3970X, because they just have so many damn cores, right? But to have something specialized where like I was actually impressed with looking at X264 footage on my iPad and editing on that, and like actually just scrubbing timeline and stuff like that, and being really impressed with the performance of it. It was not that far off of what my 3970X can do with that same kind of codec. And so it makes me wonder if high compression codecs and stuff for video work are going to be popularized a little bit more because of ARM desktops and laptops from Apple.
Yeah. And then the other thing is like it's going to be easier for Apple to implement what's the new codec that just got announced? Not HEVC, but the new
one that's H.266.
Yes.
Yeah, which I can't remember the name for it. I'll look it up while you're talking.
Yeah. Apple will be able to implement that much easier if they can implement like, oh, we're just going to upgrade our T3 chip and throw it in whatever next processor is available in that lineup.
Yeah. It's versatile video coding, so it's VVC.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So like there's a weird situation where Apple can throw things in sooner too, and it's going to really change that. And so it's like I just don't know how all of that's going to affect market share, because even when Qualcomm gets to better ARM chips for Windows, the way that they currently build ARM chips is not like that. It's not how Apple currently builds their ARM chips for
It is a very different implementation, and it's still, I have my questions about what Windows can do with ARM and whether or not it's ever going to be able to really be that good. Because it's much easier for a company like Apple to rebuild their OS for ARM in specific than it is for somebody like Windows.
Especially since since Apple is much more willing still to give up on previous stuff, whereas Microsoft used to do that. They used to force upgrades.
Yeah, but not as much.
To use the new OS, but they don't even want to change the number version of Windows anymore.
Yeah, well, of course we have 1903, 2010, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but I'm talking like the core number, like Apple just went to iOS or to macOS 11. I honestly didn't think they were going to do that.
Ever. Yeah, I was kind of having that. Yeah.
They did that. And Microsoft is saying, yeah, we're not leaving 10. So now Microsoft is where Apple was 5-10 years ago.
Yeah. It's an interesting idea. I don't know. And then of course there's the concerns that would come along with using Windows on ARM with security, because Microsoft already has a problem with security focus in some ways, and obviously their platform is a lot harder to lock down than even that of Linux, and especially that of what Apple pushes out. But but it's like segmenting their security team even further because they have to also focus on potential issues specific in the ARM version of Windows. That also scares me.
Yeah,
So
and
I
that's
don't
where
know.
it's like, unless they ever reached a future point of going the Apple Silicon route and saying we are abandoning x86, which I don't think they will do, at least not in the next decade.
Yeah,
But
because
like, let's say,
x86 still has its advantages, of course.
yeah, let's say Apple proves extremely successful with Apple Silicon, which like
Yeah.
we're going way above what I think is actually going to happen. But let's say they claim 30% of the laptop and desktop market share. I don't think that's actually going to happen. Let's say they do it. Microsoft is going to have to make a fucking change if they are able to approach that point.
Yeah, that's true.
And if they're doing that because the iMacs, and the Mac Minis are so much better performance to cost wise for most consumers. Obviously, for gaming, won't be, but for most
Yeah.
consumers that want a desktop for like editing or something, let's say they are able to achieve something that just isn't competitive, or that Windows can't compete with as well.
hmm
And then let's say for laptops, they are able to claw significant market share, and Microsoft has to make a big change, and they decide, okay, we have to abandon x86 in order to stay competitive and not lose even more market share.
Yeah.
That's gonna like they're gonna have to eventually, if Apple claims enough market share, whatever that hypothetical number is, they're gonna have to abandon x86. And what
hmm
happens then?
It's going to be an interesting situation because, I mean, obviously, ARM makes more sense for something that needs to be power efficient. I'm still very skeptical about the performance of what's going to be possible on an ARM-based desktop. Of course, though, some of that also though comes down to like Apple being able to focus on optimization for their software and their operating system. And the question becomes then, like, is it even viable for Microsoft to attempt to make that switch with Windows, or are they just not going to be able to because they have the same problem that Android has with optimization and efficiency, right? And so I
Well, I
guess,
think that's where it would. I mean, we're already seeing Microsoft though make different moves than Google,
yeah,
where like we don't really see Google work with Qualcomm to make chips. We are
true.
seeing Microsoft work with Qualcomm to make chips.
This is true.
Um,
Yeah,
Whereas like Google is looking at potentially making their own chips, so they're
yeah,
going the opposite route of Microsoft.
right.
Um,
It'll
and
be
I think that
interesting to
if
see. I
if
don't know.
Microsoft has a say in the chips that Qualcomm is making for the OS that Microsoft is developing,
hmm
while I don't think it would ever reach the point of integration that Apple is achieving.
It's still better than current.
Yes.
I
Um,
guess. Yeah.
Also, one thing I wanted to hit on with what you mentioned about how we've only ever seen like the ARM chips made for power efficiency.
hmm
Desktop is the one weird situation, whereas I feel like server and laptop both need power efficiency.
Yeah.
Desktop does not.
Oh
Desktop
yeah.
is not
Yeah.
really where that, like, nobody that,
Nobody cares.
I mean,
Yeah.
businesses that are doing massive work obviously do care, but
Yes.
like, me in my place, I don't care that much about power efficiency. I care about like heat, but I don't care about like overall general just like power consumption.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I wonder what Apple could do, or any ARM chip maker could do with ARM. Like, is there a way to use ARM without giving a shit about power efficiency, where you could get some better performance out of it than people think?
To an
Or is it
extent, yes,
is it
but
not feasible? Nobody's ever attempted it, so we don't know.
yeah, but we understand the instruction sets and the thing that makes x86 so inefficient in terms of power usage and stuff is because of the versatile instruction sets that it has. And that's the same thing with Windows, right? Where like Windows is still the most versatile operating system. You can do more with Windows 10 or Windows Server 2019 than you can with any other operating system.
So
Period. Linux people will yell, but what I mean is as a whole OS, you can do more with it than anything else, and
yeah,
x86 is a part of that.
so I get that part. What I'm getting at is like, so if we look at like Apple making custom chips with all their extra hardware for all the custom specific stuff they're doing on the side.
Mhm.
And if for an iMac or for a Mac Mini, they said, as long as it doesn't overheat, we don't give a shit about power consumption.
Right, right.
What could they do with that is more so what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Could they achieve something where for the cost they can get way more performance by just saying fuck it to power efficiency, and like, um, you know, if they can make a chip that runs at the same power efficiency as let's say 3700X, what performance could they get out of that for
Yeah,
video editing? What performance could they get out of that for? I
I
don't
get what you're
think
saying.
Apple's ever
Yeah,
going to give a shit about gaming, but for gaming,
yeah.
like, are there ways that for the reasons that people buy Macs, they could get more performance out of that if they went fucking whole hog?
Right, right. I get what you're saying. Yeah, and I think that's something that we won't know for a while. But I mean,
Yeah,
we can take guesses at it, I guess is what I was
yeah.
saying. And
Because like desktop is just the one market for ARM we've
mhm.
never really seen an attempt at.
Right, right. And I guess what I was getting at was more so that the versatility of what x86 can do can't be topped by ARM. And so then it starts to become a question of, not whether or not like it'll be interesting to see the performance of what Apple's able to pull out of ARM on desktop
Yeah,
for sure, because
like
they
does
know
that
what they're going to be
versatility
using. Yeah, like as a
does that
like
versatility matter is more so I guess what I'm
right. And I think for Windows it absolutely does, but for Mac, I mean, I have my Mac Mini, right? And like, say I had a much more powerful Mac. The only things that I feel like it's great for, other than obviously basics like music or web browsing, is pretty much like video editing and that kind of stuff. There's so many things that I would just not want to or attempt to do on a Mac.
But that's more so just because Mac OS doesn't necessarily have those. It's not
Well,
like
that's what I'm getting at though. Is Apple can focus everything on Mac because you just don't do as much with a Mac, and they can focus on doing this less things that you do, doing them really well, instead of trying to be compatible with everything on the planet, like
yeah.
Windows is, right? And I mean both hardware and software, where Windows just can run anything. Um, so I don't know. It's interesting. But speaking of Windows and mobile, like power efficient computers, um, I wanted to jump into the NUC, unless you had more to add about Apple there.
No.
Okay, no. Uh, so interestingly enough, there is a NUC type competitor that is out from Asus, powered by AMD. And this is interesting because we haven't seen this form factor very much with AMD, like ever. And this looks to be a pretty nice little unit. It's pretty impressive. So it's built around Ryzen 4000 Mobile, so it's built around their APUs that they're not calling it anymore. It's running Zen 2, though, obviously, so really great architecture there. And you can have it configured with the 4300U, the 4500U, 4700U, and 4800U. And those go 4-core 4-thread, 6-core 6-thread, 8-core 8-thread, and 8-core 16-thread, respectively. So you can get a really powerful machine in this NUC form factor. Of course, again, they're the mobile chips, so they're more efficient. They're not going to clock as high, and we don't really know how the performance in terms of like cooling is going to be on this thing, but it's still an interesting form factor. And then it's running the integrated GPU running Vega with 8 compute units, so that's the best that you can get on the APU style chips right now, and up to 64 gigs of RAM, which I was happy to see because a lot of times these smaller formats are only limited to 32 gigs, and I feel like 32 gigs is not enough for like a power user environment right now. Even me, like I have 32 gigs on my laptop, and when I'm using it for work, like I'm kind of mad that I only have 32.
Yeah. This is really cool. My thing though is like I'm going to be much more interested in the second gen version of this when we have the next generation GPUs, which from everything that we have seen indicate to be a significant upgrade.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean,
Um,
Vega with 8 compute units is pretty good right now on a mobile form factor, but of
I'm
course
just
it's
like,
still no 2070 Max Q or something.
yeah, and like from everything we know about consoles, which like the next gen consoles are our best indicator of what's coming in the next gen AMD GPUs
Yeah,
because they're using the next gen AMD GPUs just slightly modified.
yeah,
It seems like the architecture differences there are vast
they
and
are.
like very, very impactful.
Yeah,
And so like this is already a great product for like, basic compute and like the general like non-gaming NUC side of things.
yeah,
But like it would be really dope to have something that is as good for like the general compute stuff and like the multitasking and stuff as this that can also like game or render a bit better
yeah,
um
that's a good point.
than Vega can do. And like from what we've seen about that, like this is a great like starting point is essentially what I'm getting at, and I can't wait to see
Hmm.
how this from AMD evolves, because I think it will, over the next couple of years, like it's already much better in my opinion than the Intel side.
Yeah, yeah.
I think within the next couple of years, it's just going to slaughter Intel NUCs.
I think so too. I mean, Intel hasn't proven to us that they can do anything. It's just been empty promises for some time now. And so that's why I get hesitant every time they say, oh, we're releasing this, and then of course I don't expect them to actually do it. And right now, like this being like kind of a first generation style thing, like I could still see this being extremely useful for like business and stuff, right? Because a lot of businesses like Vega 8 or Vega with 8 compute units is plenty for their types of workloads. And I mean, even businesses that are doing semi graphic style work, like this would be fine for doing like web development, photo work, that kind of stuff, not necessarily video editing, although that would depend on
and not necessarily like intense graphic design, but like if you're like in the context of like web development, for example, if you're just like you're working on like websites and so you're like editing images to better fit the websites and stuff, like this would be amazing for that.
And then the other thing, like the only lacking part of this is the GPU. Like 8 cores, 64 gigs of RAM, like that's more than even we use at my business for most users at the company I work at. I mean, like, and we do some work that requires a decent amount of processing power, but like this would be overkill for that. So it's pretty impressive to see that in such a small form factor. Again, I'm a little skeptical of the temperatures, but since they're mobile chips, they will hopefully do okay without being too noisy. which factors in another thing is I feel like what's important in NUCs and some of the laptops and stuff that I feel like some companies have lost, and in fact makes me really mad about like my Alienware, for example, is they will let chips overheat and downclock instead of just spinning the fans faster and being noisier. And that bugs me a lot, because if you can't get the control that say somebody like Apple's going to have, where they can keep the temperatures down a bit and just lower the clock speeds without hitting that 100 degrees mark, which they do hit on some of their machines, but you get my point. Then I feel like the fan speeds just need to be increased. And like my Alienware, if it had fans that spun like 30% faster, I feel like it would be like very usable.
So when it comes to these NUC-like devices, so the 4-core 4-thread and the 6-core 6-thread release September 7th. In the UK, at least. We don't have US listings yet, but they release in the UK September 7th.
Okay.
And those two come with a 65-watt power supply. Whereas the
is it external? Did they say?
It does not say in this article.
Okay, I would hope it's internal, but anyway.
The 8-core 8-thread and the 8-core 16-thread have 90-watt power supplies, and they are September 21st is when they release. And it ranges anywhere from 275 euros, which is about $360, to 500 euros, which is like 600 and something dollars.
Okay.
$653, and that's before buying RAM and
right, yeah, because it's a NUC, it's like a bare bones system.
Yeah. Now we don't know what that would translate to, because sometimes with electronics, the pricing scales based on the dollar amount, differences. But sometimes it also is $275 euro is also 275 US, and like Europe kind of gets screwed. So we'll see what that actual pricing for consumers outside of those that pay the euro. I mean, even if you live in the UK and you use pounds, like that might be very different pricing.
Right.
So we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And I guess what I was getting at with the fan speed is I hope, I want to see companies, especially in the higher performance realm, look at increasing fan speeds to keep clock speeds up and keep performance in there, because I guess the thought that goes through my head is like, this has an 8-core 16-thread, right? And like, if you can't keep an 8-core 16-thread cool enough to keep it under its thermal throttle point, then you shouldn't put an 8-core 16-thread in there.
So it does have a power brick.
Okay. That kind of sucks, but it's not too horrible. I feel like here's our tiny PC with a power brick the same size, is like a little annoying, but not too bad. Like Apple's done a good job with that, actually, with their MacBook Pro lineup and MacBook lineup, is having the power brick be actually decently compact, although it takes up a huge amount of space on your outlet, but still.
Yeah, and it's really hard to tell in this picture how big the power brick is relative to the device, because the device is like much further back. So it's like, I don't know if the power brick looks way smaller, but I don't know if that's just because of the placement and the scaling that they used for the photo, or if it's actually way smaller.
Yeah, right. So I don't know. Huh. Well, it'll be interesting to see what it's like. I mean, I have a certain interest in this from a business desktop standpoint. It seems like it could be really good. So kind of cool. So the next thing I wanted to jump into was the University of Arizona, which has just been awarded 5 years, $26 million grant. So $26 million over a 5-year period from the National Science Foundation to develop the quantum internet, as they're calling it, which really is just a quantum-based network, like a network that quantum computers can communicate over to, in a sense. Now it's been labeled the Center for Quantum Networks by the National Science Foundation, and they're partnering with MIT, Harvard, Yale, among some other places to start this. And what they're trying to compare this to is the original development of ARPANET, which was where the internet came from, hoping to like change the world the way the internet has. Now, I don't know. I'm very interested to see what comes of this, obviously, but like comparing what you're trying to do to something that changed the world more than it knew it did is like you're trying to say it will, which makes me more skeptical. You know what I mean, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, my thing when it comes to those types of claims is like I don't know enough about, like, I know that quantum computing is not as useful from a widespread perspective as normal computing.
Yeah.
But who knows if the gains of quantum computing in the applications they are specific enough in will be of such significant gain that a quantum computing network will have those like compounding like beneficial effects that the ARPANET and then therefore the internet
that
did.
like impact on the world.
I in general will trust the foundation handing out money to build this network more than I will trust my judgment, because they know more about this than me. And it's not like National Science Foundation is going to convince people who don't like, they might get a little bit more funding for the foundation by saying we're doing this big deal thing.
Right.
But also like the people they have to convince to get the funding probably don't even know what fucking ARPANET is.
That's true. I guess what I'm saying is there's a certain part of me that feels a little weird when you try to say we are going to be as groundbreaking as this thing that nobody knew was going to be groundbreaking. It's kind of hard to like know how groundbreaking a product is going to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
but I mean,
that
doesn't, like, just because we didn't know ARPANET was going to be a big deal, or like this big of a deal, doesn't mean that like now that we know, if what they know about quantum computing and its theoretical benefits, if they think that could be on par with what ARPANET ended up being, that is a fair comparison.
I guess so. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be as unexpected for it to be on par with ARPANET.
I guess so. Yeah. It just makes me feel like it obviously puts the yeah, I can't say it. It makes me skeptical because also, it's like trying to. It almost sounds like trying to say it's better than it is, But who knows?
Also, though, like if they were to say it's on par with the creation of the internet, that is, in my opinion, an even bigger scale claim.
They are trying to say it's going to have the same significance as the internet, though, too.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to say like it's going to change the world the way the internet has. But of course, this was from engineering.arizona.edu is where I read about that. So,
okay.
That's not from the NSF. That is from Arizona University itself.
Okay.
So,
well, then of course they're going to try and claim because they're bigger, the ones getting the grant. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're looking for, obviously they're wanting to get more grants, more money, that kind of stuff. But it'll be interesting, and it's cool to see that they are creating a Master of Science program in quantum computing. Now that's something that I didn't even realize we don't really have yet. Is like you can't really get a master's in quantum computing, so it's kind of awesome.
And I mean it makes sense that you wouldn't have been able to, because like there's only a few quantum computers in the world.
Yeah, like to an extent it makes sense, but like it also would be nice. Like it's just cool to see that we are getting degrees in quantum computing because at this point in time, like it feels like in some ways you don't have that paperwork credit for it. In some ways, you know what I mean? So I'm glad to see that, and it's useful for people that are maybe wanting to get into that sort of thing, like maybe a younger me, for example, when I was considering colleges and stuff, would look at something like this and go, maybe I want to go to University of Arizona then, or one of these places that has the ability to do that.
If, let's say, this year you were graduating with your bachelor's in computer science, master's in quantum computing, the first year a degree is available, holy shit, is that valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even if you're just coming out of high school and you're like, okay, now I know the direction I want to aim. And so, like when they establish something like this, you can be like, okay, what prerequisites am I going to take at the colleges I'm currently living at before I graduate and move on to trying to get a master's at a place like
especially this. Since probably 4 years from now there will be better quantum computing degrees.
Yeah, right, exactly. So it's pretty cool. I am glad this is happening, I guess is what I'll say. So I thought it was newsworthy because it's really interesting and I want to see more money dumped into innovative technologies, but also, can we figure out a good type of encryption so that it can't be broken?
Isn't there? I mean, there is some supposedly quantum resistant encryption.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff being worked on.
I don't really trust it until there is quantum computing specifically focused on encryption to test it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is, we have people, cryptographers, that are doing work on it, but it's like having to understand cryptography and quantum computing at the same time is a lot of work for one person, and so we need more people in the field to see, how available, or how see what the possibilities are going to be.
Yeah. And also, anyone that does anything on the internet that they're so concerned about, like, the government knowing, like, just realize that they're collecting a bunch of data to massively decrypt once quantum computing is viable.
Yeah, exactly.
Just know that.
Yeah, like that's the goal they're going for. So whatever you're doing now that might be really bad and illegal, you're probably going to be caught in 20 years. So just keep it in mind.
Hey, just only do stuff that has a statute of limitations within a few years. You're good.
I don't think anybody doing that kind of stuff is doing that level of research. I'm sorry.
I mean, like, yeah, but like most crimes that you would commit on the internet, unless you're a child predator, at which point you can go fuck yourself.
Yeah,
but like if you're doing like financial crimes or whatever, like it's already it's like what most states it's like 7-year.
Yeah, that's true.
Statute of limitations.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, it's about that. Yeah, so. I mean, yeah, that's a good point. So I actually just realized this maybe should have gone up ahead in this new section.
I had thought about that earlier, but oh
well. So some Qualcomm security issues that have been outed. So the first thing I will say is that there have been fixes worked on and they're being rolled out. But good luck to you Android users that get updates slowly. I hope that everybody with a Galaxy S7 is going to somehow get the updates for this. Now,
yeah, so if you're on a OnePlus or a Pixel, you're probably going to be a little better off.
Yes.
Everyone else, you're probably fucked.
So what this is, the second thing I'll say is they have not seen exploits in the wild, and they have not outed what these exploits are, because obviously we know it's going to take a long time to patch this stuff. So they are not talking about how to do these exploits in any kind of detail, but they're saying that it does affect more than 40% of Android devices worldwide, and it's been dubbed Achilles. Now that means like the whole set of vulnerabilities has been dubbed Achilles, not one vulnerability. So it was like over 400 issues in their code, and it's been given a certain number of CVEs. I can't remember how many it is. It was like 7 or 8. Let me see here. I'm sure I can find it. It was a lot of CVEs. It was pretty sad. Did I not open the article? Let me open it up. So now, again, fixes have been implemented to an extent, but they haven't been able to, obviously actually push those out, and who knows how long it's going to take. And so the number of CVEs is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 CVEs dedicated to this. So that's not good. And like I said, no details, but it looks like these flaws could be used to eavesdrop on communications, crash phones, and execute arbitrary code.
Nice.
So yeah, that's bad. And luckily they haven't released any of this information, but that does make it hard to judge how difficult these are, right? Because like we have vulnerabilities like what's happened with Spectre and Meltdown back when those were around, and other types of vulnerabilities that are similar, where it's like sometimes the solution is worse, the cure is worse than the vulnerability, or the vulnerability is just so hard to implement that it's not that big of a deal. And as of right now, we don't really understand how challenging these are to do. So it could be that, okay, maybe of that 40%, only 10% are going to be patched, but like it's maybe not a big deal. but a lot of the people that have looked at it are saying it seems to be pretty bad. So yeah, and if it was that
Yeah, it would also
difficult, they
depend
would
on like
release the code.
who has those phones. Like, if like a government official has a
Mm-hmm.
phone, like they're obviously a much higher target. And
Yes.
that's where I feel like with a lot of security issues, things get kind of I don't want to say blown out of proportion, but just like I guess blown out of proportion is what I'll say.
Yeah.
Um, but like there's a lot of security issues that just like most people wouldn't be affected by, not because their hardware or software wouldn't be affected, but
Yeah.
because like nobody gives a shit about your data, Karen.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. That's also a good point. Is I mean, obviously things that could potentially lead to theft of your social security number or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Are
If you
bad
can
identity
if you
theft.
can mass execute code, then that's a
Hmm.
concern. Like
But if it's
if somebody can
specific,
throw malicious code into like if they can hack an Android app and throw malicious code in there and then it's used by a widespread number of users that
hmm,
and like 10% of Android users all of a sudden had this malicious app, that would be a problem.
yeah,
But if it's something that they have to be targeted on, then unless you're in a position where you would be targeted or
hmm,
could be targeted realistically, like it's not a concern. Like,
yeah,
I mean, even you would be of someone that is of more concern because you work in IT.
yeah, that's true.
Whereas, like me, like I'm a concierge at an apartment building. Nobody gives a shit about the data I have. Like they might give a shit about the data I have access to, but
Right,
not the
right.
data on my phone.
Yeah, yeah,
And so it's like that's the type of thing where, um, it's like 40% of Android users worldwide might be even down to a small handful, few thousand people worldwide that it actually matters on. But
right.
those few thousand people, it could be a very, very big deal if it's easy to use.
Yeah, and of course it's always good to, be as secure as possible, right? So like
Yes.
by no means are we saying that, it's not something you should pay attention to, but like you don't necessarily need to panic or worry about it, right? Whereas
Yeah.
like somebody that works in, IT, like me for example, when there's a Windows vulnerability, like there have been times where I have to, work extremely late at night to make sure something's patched because I have concerns.
Yeah.
Um
And when it's something like this where we don't know how to exploit it, it's of higher
yeah.
concern because if it is mass exploitable, then that's a very big deal.
Yes, yes.
Whereas when we find out there are things that are, like, oh, you have to very specifically target a device,
Yeah, or have like
then that's
physical
where it's,
access or yeah.
yeah,
Or some of
then
the more
it's,
recent vulnerabilities are like you have to have an already administrative rights, root privileges on a computer that's already compromised to execute this vulnerability to, cause even more problems. So
yeah,
it's the thing I will say is with a lot of the more recent vulnerabilities that we've seen, that code and well not the code but like the proof of concept gets released, and it gets released because it's something that's so hard to do that nobody's going to take the time or effort to do it anyway. So the fact that this hasn't been released makes me a little more concerned that it might actually be
mm-hmm.
a little easier to do something widespread with it. Whereas like Spectre and Meltdown, there was a ton of stuff that was not patched with that.
Yeah,
When it first got announced, and even the patches that first came around caused performance problems, and in some cases didn't even fix the issue. And so that was like it's so hard to implement. Nobody really worried about it anyway, right?
mm-hmm.
But this maybe could be. So we'll just have to wait and see, I guess.
Yeah, them keeping this stuff secret is a little interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it's not that abnormal for like a 0-day type vulnerability, but it just seems like there's less information given this time than there has been with more recent stuff.
Who disclosed the vulnerability? Was it Qualcomm or was it?
This was disclosed by looking here. I think it was disclosed specifically by I'm looking. It was talked about at the virtual DEF CON hacking conference, which happens every year. It was just virtual this year for the first time for obvious reasons. Let's see. Outlined this week, InfoSec experts at Checkpoint Research are the ones that talked about it.
Okay. The reason I ask, I don't know enough about them. Like I know certain organizations like, Google's their team that does the like hunts for 0 days.
Whatever it's called. Yeah, I
Yeah.
forgot. Yeah.
Like they have a specific policy
X Labs,
of
I think. Yeah.
yeah, no, not X Labs. X Lab is the
Yeah,
like
that's- product
advanced
development.
research,
Yeah.
product development team. But like Google's exploit team has a specific policy of releasing the details within a certain amount of time. And so if they made public a vulnerability but didn't release the details, that would be very concerning.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I don't know Checkpoint Research, and so like it might be normal for them to disclose, hey, there is an issue, but we're
Yeah,
not
and they
going to
might
give
be
details.
I mean, they're probably working with Qualcomm, saying, hey, we found these
Yeah.
issues, they need to be fixed. We won't talk about how you can do them though. We won't proof of
Yeah.
concept it.
But I'm just
I
saying,
don't know
like,
much about them either.
depending on the research team,
Yeah.
whether or not they disclose how it works
Mm-hmm.
can be very different. And so I don't think
Yeah.
that should necessarily be read into too much.
Yeah, it's just something I was pointing out. Yeah, because I mean,
Yeah.
some teams it would be very abnormal for them to not release a proof of concept, and some the other way
Yeah.
around it. I don't
Like
know much about Checkpoint Research either.
like Google, for example, I think they give 90 days before they release it, no matter what. And
That's
that is to
correct.
try
Yeah.
and force them to get a fix out as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And so if Google ever, said, hey, we know about this, it's been 6 months, that would be very, very concerning.
Yeah.
If they
Absolutely.
didn't disclose how that worked. But
Yeah.
Checkpoint, maybe that's just par for the course. Or
Yeah.
maybe they're disclosing it to the public now and they have that 90-day policy, and 90 days from now we'll find out how
What
it's
it was.
exploited.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's interesting. It's very interesting, and
So.
I feel bad if it's bad. I feel bad for most Android users.
Yeah. Well, no, 40%. That's not most.
Okay, you're right. That's a good point. I feel bad for most of the 40%.
Okay.
So this is one that you added in here that was interesting, and actually, the site's yelling at me about ad blocking, even though I don't do full ad blocking, so I can't read it. So I'll let you talk about it.
Oh, yeah. So, Amazon is apparently looking at taking over JCPenney and Sears locations within some malls to use as fulfillment centers. So specifically, they're in talks with Simon Property Group, which is the largest mall ownership group in the United States, to take over the closed locations of Sears and JCPenney's within those malls to use as fulfillment centers. So the idea being, malls are generally in pretty centralized locations.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking at setting up centralized fulfillment centers to get packages out quickly,
it kind of makes sense.
Malls are in a great location.
And they could even have a pickup area in the fulfillment center too. Yeah.
Because they already have parking lots. They already have places to both park the vans and also park the cars for people looking to pick up.
Yeah.
However, this obviously is kind of counterintuitive to what malls look for in customers, and that malls want customers, and by malls want customers, they want businesses that draw in other customers, that draw people into their other businesses.
Well, that's the idea. So, you go to the mall, and even if you don't buy from those bigger businesses, you at least spend some money on food or whatever it may be.
Exactly, yeah. And so, like, that's where it's going to be interesting to see how malls develop going forward. Malls have to make a change. Retail is changing. You can say it's dying, you can say it's not. It's changing.
It's changing for sure.
And so we've seen certain things, like one of the smaller policies that I really liked from Andrew Yang was the American Mall Act, where he wanted to deal with the fact that dying malls hurt property values by making it so that malls aren't dying, but rather changing. And so the idea was, if a state wanted to turn a mall into a high school or turn a mall into a public space, they could get matching funds. That was his idea for policy. The idea is just make it so that the mall isn't a waste of space. It's not dying. So we live in the Portland metro area. I'm not going to get too granular with where we live, but we live in the Portland metro area, and there's Mall 205. Now, I don't know if you've been there recently, but it's depressing.
I have. It's really sad.
Like if you go to Mall 205, for anyone that lives in the area, you probably go to Target or Home Depot, and you don't go into the mall. If you go into the mall, like, the food court has like one restaurant open, and the rest of it is closed. It's terrifying.
Scary. Yeah, it's really sad.
And if that was thriving in any way, even if it was like, oh, we've taken out all the restaurants and it's now like an indoor park or some bullshit, like, that would be better for property value because it would get used. And so even if Amazon just turns these into fulfillment centers, it's better for the area, I guess, but it doesn't help the rest of the stuff in the mall.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think that this might work better in areas where the malls are transitioning and they don't need the other traffic. Again,
Yeah.
using a local example, Mall 12, or not Mall 12, Lloyd Center Mall,
Yeah.
which is not owned by Simon Property Group. It's owned by a different property group. I looked it up. But that one is transitioning to be more entertainment focused. And so they're
Uh-huh.
setting up a concert hall with Live Nation. And that concert venue is going to have a bar on a different floor, that type of stuff. And so they're more so focused on like live entertainment,
Yeah. Yeah.
is
So
how
it's
they're trying to
interesting.
set up that mall. And so if the opposite end of the mall has an Amazon fulfillment center, that's not going to hurt it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, not at all.
It's not going to
So,
help, but it's not going to hurt it. And that's, I
mhm.
think, what they need. Whereas, if you're a normal mall, and all of a sudden an Amazon fulfillment center opens up, that might actually hurt the small businesses and the retail in there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. So,
GameStop losing sales to Amazon because Amazon can now deliver within 2 hours much easier would
yeah,
be bad for the
Amazon.
mall,
Hmm.
but Amazon is not competing with a concert venue
Right. Right. Yeah. That's a
yet.
good
I'm
point.
sure they'll try
Yeah.
to.
I mean, yeah, they're going to try and compete with absolutely everything. Of course, it's kind of disgusting, but
Yeah.
well, I mean, I wouldn't even say kind of. It's just
Yeah.
disgusting. But yeah, interesting. Yeah. I mean, Amazon taking over everything does worry me, and Amazon being in more places worries me. But I can see the business strategy behind it, and I can see, don't want to waste that space either way, right? So
Yeah. Like, the way I see it, it's worse to have nothing there than to have Amazon there, but it'd be
right,
better to have just about anything else there than Amazon.
yeah, yeah, agreed. Oh boy.